Okay, so Mike has talked about password hashing and mentioned that there are ways to crack passwords. There are so many tools out there that can do this, depending on what kind of password you want to crack. Do you want to crack a password for an Excel document, for a PDF file, for a remote desktop protocol or RDP server, or as we're going to do in our case, a Linux hashed password? So let's take a look at how to do this using Kali Linux, which has all of these types of tools built in and ready for you to learn how to use and to explore. Needless to say, we want to make sure that we don't use this kind of attack against password hashes that we don't have the right to have access to. We need consent from system owners to do this, or if you're setting up your own lab, you can do whatever you want without consent. So let's get started here in Kali Linux. Now, the first thing I want to do is use the sudo prefix command because we want to run our commands with elevated root privileges. I've signed into Kali Linux with the standard user account called Kali, K-A-L-I. That's not the root account that has full privileges, hence the requirement to prefix elevated commands with sudo. So what I want to do is take a look at the tail end. So I'm going to use the tail command in Linux to view the last 10 lines of a text file, specifically /etc/password, spelled P-A-S-S-W-D, here in Linux. Now, the first time I run an elevated command, it's going to say, well, what's the password for your current username, which is Kali? With Kali Linux, the password is the same. It's Kali. So K-A-L-I, and I'm in. Now, in Linux, the etc password file contains user account information. For example, notice the last entry here is for a user account that I've created called U1, as in user1. Now that's just account information. It doesn't contain the password hash. That's in a separate file. And there's a reason this is important. You'll see that. Let's take a look then using sudo tail, this time at a file called /etc/shadow. Now, you'd think that the password would be in the file called password, right? Not true. It's not the case in Linux. Instead, it's in the shadow file. Of course, that makes perfect sense. So if we take a look at the tail end of the shadow file in Linux, we've got a reference to user1 again. The two files are used together when authenticating with the Linux account. But what we have with the U1 account is we have a hashed password that follows it. It looks like a bunch of gobbledygook, all kinds of weird characters. That's the password hash. So what happens is when a user, specifically U1, authenticates to this Linux host, when they enter the correct password, and that goes through a one-way hashing algorithm, it results in that same hash. That means they know the password, they're in. There are ways to crack that. That's what we're going to explore. So now we know what the premise is. What I want to do here in Kali Linux is I'm going to take a look at a file, actually maybe the first 10 lines of a file using the head command, text file. And I want to look at /usr/share/word-lists. Kali Linux includes some word list files you can use when you're trying to crack passwords. I've unzipped one and it's called rocku.txt. Now the head command only shows me the first 10 lines. If we wanted to, we could use the cat command to view the whole thing, but it's going to take a while. As you might imagine, there are a lot of passwords. So we see a couple of passwords here that are commonly used. Believe it or not, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is still used all the time. And variations of the word password, which I have added at the top of this file. Now we're going to use this file in conjunction with the username for U1, specifically whatever's in that etc password file, to try to crack the password. So here's what we have to do. We're going to use a tool called John the Ripper. So the first order of business is we're going to use sudo and we're going to run the unshadow command. The unshadow command, all it really does is it lets you combine the contents of /etc password and the contents of /etc shadow. Remember those two files we looked at? We need that information in one file that we will analyze. And that's all the unshadow command is doing. So unshadow /etc password /etc shadow greater than sign for output redirection. I want to output that to a file that I've chosen to call creds.txt, credentials.txt. Okay, so now I've mashed together the contents of those two files into my own file called creds.txt. So now what I want to do is I want to crack some passwords. Okay, let's see what happens. So I'm going to use the John command, and I'm going to specify -- word list, that's a parameter, equals, And I'm going to point to that file I showed you the first 10 lines of, /usr/share/wordlists/rocku.txt. Then, as another parameter, I'm just going to put in the name of my credential file. And I just called that creds.txt. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter. So at this point, it ran quicker than I thought it would. It looks like it's cracked it. So let's take a look. We're going to run the John command with --show, and I'm going to specify the creds.txt file. It's done 2 cracks. It found that there's a user called Callie, and it looked at the password hash in the shadow file and found that the password for that account is Callie, which is true. It also found user1, and it found in the shadow file the encrypted password is a variation of the word password, as you can see here. So that's how quickly we can simply crack hashed passwords. What it does require is you to have access to those 2 credential files in the first place. But there are plenty of ways to get to that point. And there you have it. That's how easy it is to use freely available tools to crack hashed passwords.